The sun was pouring through my kitchen window when my phone buzzed. Amy's name glowing like a small promise I didn't know was about to break. My suitcase sat by the door, tagged and ready for Hawaii, the scent of sunscreen still clinging to my hands. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, too steady for what she was about to say. If you've ever trusted someone you love completely, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because you'll understand what came next. The silence after that call was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I stood there, surrounded by the pieces of a trip that would never happen, and a truth I couldn't yet see coming. That was the moment everything started to unravel. It happened so suddenly that I almost laughed at first, because surely it had to be a mistake. My daughter called one quiet Sunday morning, her voice carefully steady, telling me the Hawaii trip we'd been planning for months had to be canceled. Something about plans changing, about not feeling well. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee in hand, trying to swallow that familiar ache that comes when you know there's more being left unsaid. For weeks, that trip had been my little light, matching swimsuits, the hotel confirmation printed and stuck to my fridge, the thought of watching the sunset with my daughter and her husband. I told myself it was fine, that maybe she really was sick, that families reschedule things all the time. But that fragile comfort lasted less than a day. Later that afternoon, my friend Diane called. She had just run into my daughter at the airport. The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't going somewhere new. They were going exactly where we were supposed to go. The same flight, the same hotel, my name erased. It took a moment for the silence to settle around me. I realized it wasn't just about a trip anymore. It was about what it represented. I had been written out, quietly and completely, from something I helped build. The worst part wasn't the lie about being sick. It was that they'd made sure I wouldn't find out, unless life decided to tell me. I stood there, staring at that printed itinerary on my fridge, the one with my name still highlighted in pink. That's when it hit me with full weight they hadn't canceled the trip. They'd canceled me. And in that stillness, beneath the shock and disbelief, something inside me began to shift. Slowly, quietly. Not rage, not yet. Just the beginning of something sharper. The awareness that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family was about to change. My name is Linda Miller. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I've thought of myself as one thing: a mother. Not just any mother, but the kind who remembers every favorite meal, every birthday card, every detail that might make her child feel loved. After my husband passed away 12 years ago, my world got quieter. Too quiet, sometimes. But Amy, my only daughter, remained my purpose. Watching her grow into an adult, find her career, and then fall in love again made everything I'd endured worth it. Life in my small Michigan town is simple. Mornings start with the smell of brewed coffee and the soft creak of the porch swing. My neighbors wave when they see me trimming my roses, and the mailman always says hello. There's comfort in the routine, teaching Sunday school at church, baking when the air turns cold, and calling Amy every evening, even if it's just to hear how her day went. When she got engaged last year, I wanted to give her something special, something that would celebrate her new beginning, but also remind her of ours. Those years when it was just the two of us figuring out life together. That's how the Hawaii trip was born. I spent months comparing flights, researching resorts, saving every bit of my pension check I could spare. It wasn't extravagant, just meaningful. A week in paradise. My gift to her before she started a new chapter as someone's wife. I remember printing out the itinerary and feeling proud. Proud that even after retirement, even after losing my husband, I could still create moments that mattered. I imagined us walking along the beach, laughing about old times, maybe even talking about her wedding plans. I wanted to feel close again, to her, to life. Sometimes, when you love someone that deeply, you stop noticing the distance that's quietly growing. You tell yourself it's just life getting busy. You ignore the small signs, the short calls, the polite smiles, the way they start saying I more than we. I brushed it off because love, at least to me, has always meant giving the benefit of the doubt. That trip was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. I didn't know then that it would become the moment everything I believed about family, trust, and love would start to unravel. It was Patricia who called, Amy's future mother-in-law. Her voice was warm, cheerful, the kind of tone that assumes everyone's on the same page. She thanked me, almost effusively, for being so gracious about letting the kids enjoy the Hawaii trip alone. She said it must have been hard for me, given my health problems. For a moment, I thought she had the wrong person. Health problems I hadn't so much as missed a morning walk in months. But as she spoke, the words began to click together in a way that made my stomach drop. This wasn't a mistake. This was the story Amy had told. A lie. A clean, convenient excuse to erase me from the trip I planned, paid for, and dreamed about. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the faint ring my coffee cup had left on the wood. The quiet felt heavy, like the air itself knew something sacred had broken. I thought about every small kindness I'd given, every way I'd tried to be supportive, only to be turned into a burden in someone else's story. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with silence. My daughter's silence. The realization that she had told the world I was too fragile to be included. That she had rewritten me as someone to be pitied, not loved. And yet, beneath the ache, something steadier began to form. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. A quiet understanding that kindness without boundaries only teaches people to take without hesitation. That day, I decided something within me had to change. I would no longer hand over my peace to people who saw it as disposable. They could keep their vacation. But the comfort of knowing I'd always be waiting, that they had just lost forever. That night, my house felt quieter than usual. The clock in the living room ticked louder than it ever had before, marking time between disbelief and awakening. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, though I barely touched it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd planned that trip. Flights, hotels, excursions, all laid out with the care of someone who wanted everything perfect. Now, every plan felt hollow, like a reflection of something I no longer recognized. For hours, I just sat there, letting the ache breathe. Betrayal has a strange rhythm. It starts sharp, then turns heavy, then quiet. The kind of quiet that feels almost peaceful, because the worst has already been revealed. I kept thinking about Amy's face, her laugh, the way she'd thank me for always being there. I replayed it like a movie I'd seen too many times. knowing now how it ended. Somewhere around midnight, a thought began to form, not out of anger, but clarity. Every confirmation email, every booking, every payment, it was all under my name, my credit card, my signature. For all their lies, for all their careful rewriting of the story, they had forgotten one thing: none of it existed without me. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt like a quiet companion in the dark. I scrolled through the reservations, flight seats, hotel suite, the rental car waiting for pickup. Every line reminded me of how much I'd poured into this gift, how much love I'd built into every choice. And for the first time since the call, I smiled, not out of spite, but realization. I wasn't powerless. I had been the architect of this entire trip, and architects, I've learned, can rebuild or dismantle whatever they design. I didn't rush. I read through every policy, every deadline. I noted times and refund options, not with vengeance, but precision. My emotions were cooling into something sharper, cleaner. The fog was lifting. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft and silent. I remember thinking how fitting that was, how endings often arrive disguised as stillness. I turned off the lamp, leaving the kitchen in darkness, but my mind was alive with light. They thought they had taken everything from me. What they didn't realize was that I was just beginning to take something back. By morning, my sorrow had turned into focus. There was no anger left, only a quiet determination that came from finally seeing things clearly. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to take inventory of everything I had created. Every reservation, every payment confirmation, every detail that had once represented love now felt like a ledger of misplaced trust. The trip was entirely under my name, my credit card, my email, my signature on every form. It was my gift, my effort, my belief in family made tangible. And now, with a few deliberate clicks, I realized I could undo it all. I started with the flights. The airline's website loaded slowly, as if the universe wanted me to take my time. I reviewed the itinerary, 3 tickets, all under one booking. My name at the top, their names listed below mine. It felt poetic, in a way. I canceled every seat except one, mine. The refund processed instantly. I could almost hear the sound of control settling back into my hands. Next came the hotel. The resort had been my pride, a quiet place on Maui's North Shore, where the rooms overlooked the ocean. I logged into the account, my fingers steady. There was an option to modify guests. With one stroke, I removed their names, leaving mine as the sole occupant. Then I upgraded the room. A suite, ocean view, breakfast included. I didn't rush. Each action felt intentional, like clearing space in my own heart. The rental car came next, reserved under my driver's license. I canceled the extra driver option, then the excursions, snorkeling, a dinner cruise, a sunset luau, all booked through my email. I quietly withdrew their tickets. Every notification went directly to me. Every refund neatly returned to the same account that had funded their deception. I didn't send messages. I didn't need to. I knew they would find out soon enough. Standing at the check-in counter, their names unrecognized, their smiles fading as they realized the trip they'd stolen no longer existed. When I finished, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The silence of my house felt different this time. Not heavy, but clean. I had not yelled. I had not demanded explanations. I had simply restored the truth that what was mine would not be used to erase me. A week later, I packed my suitcase. Nothing extravagant, just a few sundresses, a book, and my husband's old camera. I boarded the same flight that was once meant for all of us, and when the plane lifted above the clouds, I felt lighter than I had in years. Hawaii was everything I had imagined. The air smelled like salt and flowers. The ocean stretched endlessly blue, indifferent to the small tragedies of people like me. I walked the beach at sunset, letting the water wash over my feet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt present in my own life. Revenge wasn't what this was. It wasn't about punishment. It was about balance, about reclaiming something that had always been mine: peace. The same peace I'd given so freely to others, now finally given back to myself. As the sun disappeared into the horizon, I realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes, it simply means choosing yourself and walking forward without needing anyone to follow. When I stepped off the plane in Maui, the first thing that hit me was the air, soft, warm, and alive. It carried the faint sweetness of plumeria and salt, and for a moment, I simply stood there, breathing it in. The sunlight wrapped around me like an embrace I didn't know I needed. I wasn't arriving as someone's mother or hostess or caretaker. I was just Linda, and that, I realized, was enough. The first morning, I walked down to the beach before sunrise. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the horizon still a soft shade of lavender. I watched the waves roll in and pull away, a rhythm so calm and certain it almost made me tear up. For the first time in years, I wasn't hurrying for anyone. I wasn't planning, fixing, or accommodating. I was simply being, and that felt revolutionary. At first, the quiet felt strange. I'd spent most of my life surrounded by noise, the hum of family, the endless cycle of doing things for others. But as the days passed, the silence began to sound like music. I spent hours reading under the palms, swimming in the ocean, and eating dinner alone with the sound of waves as company. Solitude, I learned, wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. There were moments when I thought of Amy, not with anger, but with a kind of distant compassion. Maybe she needed to learn her own lessons, just as I was learning mine. I didn't wish her pain. I simply accepted that some distances aren't meant to be closed right away. As I watched the sunset one evening, colors spilling across the sky like a watercolor painting, I felt something inside me settle. The pain, the betrayal, the guilt, they were still part of my story, but no longer my identity. I had walked through them and come out lighter. That trip, the one I'd once built for others, had become my sanctuary. Every wave that touched the shore seemed to whisper the same truth. Peace isn't something others give you. It's something you choose. When I finally packed to go home, I felt no dread, no ache, only calm gratitude. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived in Hawaii with a broken heart. I was someone who had reclaimed her name, her power, and her stillness. And as I looked out from the plane window on the flight home, I smiled softly, knowing that real freedom had never been about distance. It had always been about coming back to myself. When I came home from Hawaii, the air felt different, lighter somehow, even though winter was still clinging to Michigan. My house, once heavy with memories of waiting and disappointment, felt peaceful. The silence didn't press on me anymore. It soothed. I unpacked slowly, placing each folded sundress in its drawer, each seashell on the windowsill. I wasn't returning to the same life. I was returning as someone who had finally drawn a line and learned to stand on her side of it. It didn't take long for Amy to reach out. Her first messages were angry, confused, full of questions I didn't feel compelled to answer. She couldn't believe I had taken the trip. She said things that once would have broken my heart, but this time, they didn't. I understood that her words came from shock and guilt, not truth. So, instead of arguing, I simply told her that I hoped she was well, and that one day, she'd understand. Then I let the silence do the rest. For weeks after that, I thought a lot about love, the kind that gives too much, and the kind that finally learns when to stop. I realized that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates that remind people how to treat us. I had spent so much of my life confusing kindness with self-sacrifice, thinking they were the same thing. They're not. Love without respect corrodes the soul, no matter who it's for. In time, Amy's tone softened. There wasn't an apology, not really, but there was hesitation in her words, a small crack in the armor. I didn't need her to say sorry. I just needed to know that maybe, someday, she'd see the difference between generosity and being taken for granted. I still love her, deeply. But now, that love has edges. It knows where it ends and where I begin. Peace, I've learned, doesn't always come from mending what's broken. Sometimes, it comes from accepting that some things are meant to remain apart so both can heal. And that acceptance, I think, was the truest reconciliation of all. Looking back now, I see the whole journey not as a story of betrayal, but as a story of awakening. What began as heartbreak slowly unfolded into a lesson I didn't know I needed. I learned that peace doesn't always come wrapped in forgiveness from others. It comes when you forgive yourself for staying too long in places where you weren't valued. For so many years, I thought love meant giving everything, no matter the cost. But true love, real, healthy love, has balance. It breathes only when both hearts respect each other's space. When that balance breaks, it's not selfish to step away. It's survival. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I don't rush to check my phone or worry about who might need me. I make my coffee, sit by the window, and listen to the world move quietly. That stillness, the one I once feared, has become my peace. If there's one thing I hope others take from my story, it's this: choosing yourself isn't abandonment, it's courage. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of love you can give the world is to finally love yourself enough to stop apologizing for your boundaries. Have you ever had to choose peace over approval? Tell me your story. I'd love to hear it. Peace, I've learned, isn't something others can give or take. It's something we create when we finally stop waiting for permission to be ourselves. Love without respect is an empty echo, and forgiveness begins the moment we choose to live free of resentment. I no longer measure my worth by how much I'm needed, but by how deeply I can breathe in my own quiet. That's what healing feels like. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to let go of someone to find yourself again? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.